Welcome to The Legal Truth, the podcast created to provide you general legal information about South Carolina law, lawyers, and the legal process. We will answer many of the questions I've been asked during the past 35 years about South Carolina personal injury claims and workers' compensation claims. My name is Dirk Derrick. I'm the founder of the Derrick Law Firm, and I'm your host.
Please see required ethics disclaimers in show notes.
Welcome to the Legal Truth podcast. We're here with Pearl Carey, the co-host of the podcast. Welcome, Pearl.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here.
We're talking today about the truth about being damaged by an uninsured driver. We're going to go over some questions about what uninsured coverage is, what happens when you get in a wreck with an uninsured driver, and what you can do to protect your family.
Absolutely. So first question, what happens if I am hit by an uninsured driver in South Carolina?
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of people driving who don't have insurance in South Carolina, but we do have mandatory uninsured motorist coverage in South Carolina. What will happen if someone hits you and damages you or your family and they have no insurance? You have an option. You can look and see if that person has assets that can be used to pay the damages that person caused you.
Okay.
It is unusual that that person will have assets that will cover your damages. The other option is to file against your own uninsured motorist coverage on your own vehicle. In South Carolina, that uninsured motorist coverage, or UM coverage, is mandatory. If you have insurance in South Carolina, you have uninsured motorist coverage in the same amount as your liability coverage. The minimum limits are $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident. What that means is that coverage will pay up to $25,000 in damages for anyone in your vehicle who was injured by a driver who had no insurance.
So what happens if my damages exceed that amount?
Well, it can be uncollectible unless you have other policies.
Okay.
One of the nice things about uninsured motorist coverage is that it is stackable with other uninsured motorist coverage on other vehicles in your household that when the cars are owned by resident relatives, for instance, family of four, mother, father, two high school kids, they got 4 vehicles. If they have the minimum limits of uninsured motorist coverage of $25.50 and they're injured in a wreck, they can stack those 4 coverages.
Okay.
So one person can have 25 times 4, $100,000 worth of coverage.
Right. And
the family can have $200,000 worth of coverage. So the stackability makes that coverage good if somebody has more than one vehicle.
Let's say you do stack the coverage and it's still not enough. Are you kind of, for lack of a better term, out of luck, or what happens from there?
It can be. It can be uncollectible. It's a lot of people, their response is that's not fair.
Right.
And it's not fair. But if somebody does not have coverage and does not have assets, the only chance you don't get to recover for the damages they cause is for you to have your own uninsured motorist coverage on your vehicle.
And you said that is mandatory in the state of South Carolina?
It is mandatory.
Okay.
I'd recommend people have a lot more than $25,000 worth of coverage.
Right.
It is important to realize that when you buying auto insurance, you're trying not just to cover a car and not just to have liability coverage to cover the people you may hurt with your negligence. But if you want to protect your family, you need to make sure you have enough uninsured motorist coverage
for everyone
in your car.
Right.
$50,000 for a family in a car may not go very far in any kind of significant auto accident.
So I know that you mentioned you can get damages by suing the uninsured driver. How does that typically work?
That coverage covers any verdict you would get against the at-fault driver.
Okay.
In South Carolina, you don't sue insurance companies. You sue at-fault drivers. So let's say an at-fault driver has no insurance.
Right.
They caused the wreck. We know what the uninsured motorist coverage is, and that's the insurance we'd be going after. If you go to court, and people don't believe this, but when you go to court, your insurance company that you're paying the premium to will hire a lawyer to defend the person who has no insurance.
Oh, my goodness.
When you're in court, the jury does not know that the person who caused the wreck did not have insurance. It's inadmissible evidence. They never know that. Our law in South Carolina is that the jury does not know about insurance coverage because it could influence their decision.
Wow.
So we go to court in that situation, if you had to go to court.
Right.
And the at-fault driver, if he shows up, would be at the other table, and there'd be a lawyer there. That lawyer would have been hired by your insurance company to fight you in court.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy. I wouldn't have never guessed that.
Yeah, people, when we do focus groups up here and start talking about coverages, people can't believe that. But
Right.
They say, well, if it's my coverage, they should pay me. And I said, well, it doesn't work quite like
In
that.
theory, maybe.
In theory.
Right.
It's an unusual situation for people who are in it. It's very normal for us. I mean, it happens a lot. We're filing uninsured motorist coverage claims against our own client's insurance company.
So let's say that this case does go to trial. What might the penalty be for someone who is uninsured?
That's totally separate from what we do.
Okay.
If someone is uninsured at a wreck, they will probably get fined. It could be worse than a fine if it's multiple times that they're driving
Okay.
and cause wrecks without insurance. I think they can lose their license.
Okay.
I think if they do it enough, I mean, they can get some jail time. That's the criminal aspect.
Okay.
Of,
So kind of separate from your
It's totally separate from the civil, well,
Gotcha.
the part that we handle. But they can be punished from a criminal standpoint.
Okay.
It is surprising how many people drive without insurance and without a driver's license.
So that just makes that uninsured motorist coverage, very important.
Very important.
Yeah.
If you're going to protect your family, it is very important to have.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to turn back to talk about maybe suing someone for the assets they have if they are uninsured. What kind of assets are we talking about?
Well, in South Carolina, I mean, if you file and get a judgment against someone, you have a judgment.
Right.
The first thing that's going to pay that judgment is that any insurance coverage that covers that at-fault person, at-fault driver, their coverage is going to pay first.
Okay.
Anything in excess to that will be a judgment against the at-fault party.
Right.
There are ways to do what's called supplemental proceedings, to go after people's assets. It doesn't happen very often. The
Okay.
truth is, in 35 years, I don't remember ever having a case where there's an uninsured driver who has assets. The assets have to be somewhat substantial.
Okay.
We have laws in South Carolina that protects the assets of wrongdoers up to a certain amount.
Okay.
So, you're talking about real estate that doesn't have mortgages on it and liquid assets, and that's very, very unusual. I've never seen it in an uninsured motorist situation.
I mean, I guess you can assume that a lot of these results coming from these cases are unpredictable, but for the most part, what can you as an attorney kind of expect to see in one of these cases?
Well, usually when we find out that there's no insurance on the at-fault driver's vehicle, we then look to make sure that the person driving that vehicle doesn't have another vehicle that may have insurance on it.
Okay.
Make sure that person wasn't working for somebody at the time where you may be able to find some coverage.
Okay.
But if you go down that line and can't find any coverage, then your remedy is uninsured motorist coverage.
Gotcha.
And once you exhaust that, that's it. Insurance coverage does not set the value of claims.
Okay.
It very often sets the maximum value of
So you might
claim
not get all of it.
because of collectability. You got to be
Okay.
able to collect it.
Right.
We've talked about this in a previous podcast, but every case, the value of every case is determined by three legs, like a three-legged stool.
Right.
Do you remember?
I do remember.
Okay, what's the three legs?
Damages, Help me out with the other two.
Liability
Okay.
and collectability.
Got it.
So every case is determined by the three-legged stool. You got to have a liability leg, a damaged leg, and a collectability leg.
Okay.
And what you mean, you have to prove all those aspects. If you have a three-legged stool that has a weak leg, when you sit on it, you fall.
Right.
It's how my professor taught me in law school. So what we're talking about here with the coverage, we're talking about the collectability leg.
Right.
So you can have somebody who had terrible conduct on the highway that caused a wreck, people who have terrible injuries, but without the ability to collect the damages, and if you don't have a strong leg there, you just don't have a strong case, because
Right.
you go get a piece of paper, a judgment from the courthouse, but you may not have a way to collect it beyond what you have on your own policy for uninsured motorist coverage.
And so what can kind of prevent that collectability? I know we talked a little bit about, the type of insurance they have, if they have it in another car, things like that can allow for collectability, but what can kind of prevent that?
The only thing that you can do to prevent that is to buy the coverage yourself
Okay.
on your vehicle. And you can do that. Fortunately, in South Carolina, you can buy liability insurance. A lot of times people say, well, liability is when I hurt somebody. Well, the people you hurt may be your family members in the back seat.
Right.
You want plenty of liability coverage, so if you make a mistake and hurt your family, they would have the policy to file against.
Okay.
The uninsured motorist coverage covers you when somebody has no insurance and causes damage to your family.
Got
You
it.
need plenty of that. And then there's underinsured motorist coverage when someone has insurance but don't have enough to cover all the damages. You need plenty of that. So I encourage people to get as much as they can buy on liability, uninsured, underinsured, and on collision. A lot of people don't put collision on their car, but that can be a problem if there's a dispute about property damage afterwards.
Gotcha.
So all four of those need to be purchased at a limit that somebody can afford to protect their family.
Right.
What people don't know about insurance is that the largest part of the premium is the minimum limits and the cost of collision on the car.
Okay.
So if you're getting the minimum limits and collision on the car, you may pay $400 every 6 months.
Okay.
But if you look, you may be able to get 8 or 10 times that coverage for another $40 in those 6 months. So instead of paying $400, you're paying $440 or $450 and got 10 times the coverage.
Right.
So as you increase your coverage, it doesn't go up like 10 times to get 10 times the coverage. It may go up 1/10 to get 10 times the coverage. So people need to talk to their agents to see how cheap it is to move up the coverage
Right.
so that their family's protected.
Absolutely. Just in case, because you never know when things like that can happen.
It happens a lot, and it's a tough conversation to have with people.
Right.
If they've got $500,000 worth of medical bills, they're out of work, and the person who hit them has no insurance, may not have a driver's license, and they've got state minimum uninsured motorist coverage, then that's a hard conversation.
Right.
There's no way to help them.
Because the collectability leg, like we discussed before, maybe isn't that strong.
Absolutely.
So kind of turning back to the beginning of one of these situations, let's say someone's hit by an uninsured driver. What is the first thing I should do if I do realize, oh no, they're uninsured?
You may find out at the scene. The officer may tell you they have no insurance. You may not. A lot of times they give them a name of an insurance company, and then you contact the insurance company and they don't have insurance. While we called to set up a claim, they said that was canceled.
Wow.
So sometimes we find later, sometimes we find right after the accident. From our standpoint, we start the investigation to see where the coverage exists and what coverage exists.
Okay.
If we determine that the vehicle in which he was driving doesn't have insurance, then we start going to the next step and the next step and the next step to find all coverages that exist. And we do an asset check too, so we can tell our clients, okay, here's what funds are available to pay for damages.
And so how do I know if I need to contact an attorney for one of these situations?
You always contact the Derrick Law Firm. That shouldn't even be. You work here, you know that, don't you?
Sorry, I need to be more of an advocate.
My answer when people say, "Do I need a lawyer?" and there's people call up here and we tell them they don't need a lawyer.
Okay.
My answer is if you want somebody to represent you and build your case, you need to get a professional to do it.
Right.
If you want to do it yourself, you can do it yourself. It's like I love using the home building analogy. You know,
Build it yourself.
you can build your own house,
Right.
and I could do my own countertop work, but
Might not look that great.
it may not. So it's what people want to do. If somebody calls up here and they say, "Hey, I got bumped. I went to the hospital. I'm fine." We'll tell them they don't need an attorney, and we'll spend some time with them to tell them what they need to get together, how to file a claim.
So it can still be helpful.
Absolutely. We try to help people. I tell my attorneys if somebody needs help, spend some time with them.
Right.
Because everybody doesn't need an attorney. If somebody calls and they need ongoing care, if they continue to have problems, if they're having trouble with the insurance company, we get involved.
So, Dirk, is there anything else in particular that you think that someone who's maybe been hit by an uninsured motorist needs to know?
I think people need to be careful with what they're signing.
Okay.
With any situations. Even though it's your insurance company, you got to be careful not to sign a release before you finish your treatment and you know what your damages are, especially if you have more than one car in your household,
Right.
where you may be able to stack this uninsured coverage. If you sign a release on the first coverage, you won't be able to file on the second and third coverage.
Oh, okay.
You can't. You can do a policy. Once you sign a release against the driver who caused the wreck, you waive any other coverages
Okay.
that you're not getting paid. So I think the biggest thing I tell people, be careful what they sign so they don't waive any coverages that may still exist that they don't know about.
Right.
Another thing you should know about uninsured motorist coverage is that it's treated differently than somebody's liability insurance since you pay for it. The state of South Carolina has determined, and there's a law that says since you paid for it, if you sign an assignment with a hospital when you went in, that assignment is unenforceable against your uninsured motorist money.
Oh, okay.
If you have Blue Cross and Blue Shield and they paid your medical bills, that is unenforceable against your uninsured motorist coverage. For instance, if a third party causes you harm, liability coverage,
Right.
they pay you, and if you sign an assignment with the hospital can get some of that liability money.
Okay.
If your health insurance pay your medical bills, and when you get money from liability, if they have a subrogation right and they put us on notice that they want some of their money back, we have to pay them some of that liability money. When it's uninsured motorist coverage, since you bought the insurance, a state insurance policy can't get their money out of that uninsured motorist proceeds.
Okay.
An assignment's ineffective against the proceeds of uninsured motorist coverage.
Okay.
There's a few entities that can still be paid out of those proceeds. Medicare, a federal ERISA plan may have language that they can get some money out, but it's harder for third parties to get money out of your recovery when it's uninsured motorist.
Okay. So that's important too. That's a great benefit of having that. Well, thank you so much for spending your time speaking to me about this today, Dirk. I've definitely learned a lot, so I appreciate it.
Okay. If anybody has questions, they can call us. We don't charge to give some insurance advice over the phone. I do have a little booklet I wrote years ago on our website that's entitled 3 Feet from Disaster.
Okay.
And it's just what coverages you need to have to protect your family.
Absolutely.
And after the event, it's too late.
Right.
So if you look and see what kind of coverages would protect your family and see what the cost of that coverage is, you ought to at least see what the coverage cost.
Okay.
Because after the event, it's a hard conversation to to tell people they don't have enough coverage.
Absolutely. Well, definitely to all of our listeners, it's super important to start looking at policies and investigating that, because the best time to take a look is before an accident occurs. I know I'll definitely have Dirk review mine in the near future. You never know.
Thank you, Pearl.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Legal Truth Podcast. If you have questions that you would like answered on a future episode, please send them to thelegaltruth@derricklawfirm.com. If you would like to speak to us directly, call us at 843-248-7486. If you find the podcast valuable, please leave us a 5-star review and share the legal truth with your neighbor, friend, or family member who is seeking reliable information about a South Carolina personal injury or workers' compensation claim. Dirk J. Derrick of the Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers is responsible for the production of this podcast, located at 901 North Main Street, Conway, South Carolina. Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers has included the information on this podcast as a service to the general public. Use of this podcast and any related materials does not in any manner constitute an attorney-client relationship between Derrick Law Firm Injury Lawyers and the user. While the information on this podcast is about legal issues, it is not intended as legal advice and should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your particular state. Anyone seeking specific legal advice or assistance should retain an attorney. Any prior results mentioned do not guarantee a similar outcome. The content reflects the personal views and opinions of the participants in the podcast and are not intended as endorsements of any views or products. This podcast could contain inaccuracies. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute legal advice and is not guaranteed to be correct, complete, or up to date as laws continue to change. In this podcast, you will hear information about focus groups. Please note that not all of the firm's cases are presented to a focus group. Additionally, when speaking about juries or jurors in relation to a focus group, we are speaking of focus group participants and not actual trial juries or jurors.